Days after India assumed G20 presidency on December 1, Udaipur is all geared up for the G20 Sherpa meeting. G20 guests from various nations received a warm welcome on their arrival in the city of Lakes to attend the G20 Sherpa meeting. Rajasthan is known for warm hospitality and historical splendor, and it is a symbolic beginning for G20 to demonstrate the tradition of Atithi Devo Bhava. Mr. Kumar, as I said, a very symbolic beginning for G20 India to start showcasing our Indian tradition of Atithi Devo Bhava from Udaipur in Rajasthan. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if I might just add one thing, that here actually it is, of course, we are showcasing our culture and our civilization. And in a way, the Indian culture and civilization, it will be filtering through across the activity and agenda of under the Indian presidency. Because there are two issues here that I can see. One, of course, is that India is uniquely placed at this moment to assume the presidency of G20. Because India, among the larger economies, it has the fastest growth rate. India is a democratic country, as our leaders have said, that democracy is a DNA, and a developing country. So, with these three characteristics of Indian presidency, India is uniquely placed to actually suggest and drive an agenda as to how the global problems, in a way which are very serious, how they can be addressed, keeping in mind our own experience, and also the fact that we have a civilizational legacy, in a way, to back that experience.
As India began its G20 presidency, Mr. Kumar, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said it will work to further promote oneness, inspired by the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future. And this will be achieved during our reign for 365 days.
Yes, certainly. I think today, sadly, the world is so polarized. Even there are question marks raised about the future of G20 grouping itself. And the fact of the matter is that what the Prime Minister's message really is this, that the world is really globalized. We are so interconnected. The challenges that we face today cannot be handled or addressed by a single country, however powerful that country or how so rich that country is, or can escape from the consequences of the global crises which are actually looming ever larger and becoming even more pressing without a kind of a certain culture of dialogue and putting our heads together and our minds together as to how these crises, which actually are upon us, how these crises actually are going to be addressed and how we can all come together. In fact, in one way I can even say, it is something like the 2008 moment when the world, because of the Wall Street crisis, the global economy actually collapsed, and the G20 leaders, for the first time, they came together to address the issue as to how the global economy has to be put back on its rails. So it's that kind of situation, and I can say how difficult, in a way, the problem today for the G20 is that in the G20, as you know, in Bali, President Putin did not come. He sent his foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov. Mr. Lavrov did not stay till the very end. And the final document, which was actually issued, was not a traditional joint communique, which actually shows that all the leaders are in solidarity to address the current challenges. A leader's declaration, which is a little more loosely framed kind of a format. And there the Ukraine conflict actually took center stage. And there India's role was such that actually in a way it was able to bring people together, the different countries together, to actually agree on some text, which actually is somewhat diffuse text and somewhat unusual text. But the point is that we are starting with that kind of a background when we are facing the challenges of global warming, for example, and global economy actually in very bad shape. And you find that all these things are affecting, the world is getting polarized. And within countries, this kind of polarization you can see even in the larger countries. Even a country like China, for example, economy actually is stalling and they have a problem with how to manage the COVID crisis. So you see how different kind of challenges are coming together which have larger implications, not just for that country, but globally. And it's happening at a time when even within countries, the kind of, you hear about internal domestic polarization, a sentiment against globalization that you find in the West. So these are very big issues. And you find at the same time institutional fragility, systemic states collapsing, for example, and conflicts in different parts of the world. In fact, there's one assessment that by 2030, at the current rate, half the world's poor would be living in countries which are either collapsed or are collapsing. So you can imagine how difficult the job becomes to find global solutions, to bring everyone together when the countries are in that kind of a state. To understand how difficult the challenge is. But India is rightly placed for that reason, and that's why the Prime Minister emphasized our civilizational legacy, the fact that we're doing very well economically now, and the fact that we have a traditional democracy where inclusiveness of different opinions, and then to find a common ground to proceed further to address a challenge which faces everyone.
Mr. Kumar, the first Sherpa meeting under India's G20 presidency will set the agenda, and you have stressed upon certain points over here, prominently being the inclusivity aspect of it. The meeting is also to set the agenda for the Leaders Summit in New Delhi next September and provide the country an opportunity to outline its broad priorities. Would you please elaborate on what these priorities would be?
Well, the priorities actually have been laid out by Prime Minister himself at his closing speech at the G20 Bali Summit. He talked that Indian leadership would be to regenerate an inclusive, ambitious, decisive and action-oriented approach, a sense of trusteeship over resources. Because trusteeship means that you actually hold the resources in trust and not with a sense of possessiveness, which leads to conflict. Then various issues, have been highlighted by our G20 Sherpa. The issues like climate, digitalization of economies, health is a very big issue. The other issues like MSMEs, marginal farmers, sustainable energy transitions, sustainable development goals of the United Nations, supply chain risks, disaster risk management, a whole lot of plastic waste, eco-offenders, terrorism, multilateralism, resilient societies, sustainable lifestyles, education, nutrition. So all these things actually have been talked as to what will be the key points in our agenda. So the first which will be taking place is when these agenda items will be introduced for a broader discussion. And as the chair, India is in a position to lead the discussion. First set the agenda, then to lead the discussion, and then to find consensus amongst all the participating delegates to actually arrive at a position which will then prepare the ground for the Leaders Summit, which will take place next year in September. But it's a long process. You have the Sherpa track and you have the Finance Minister's track. Now, the Finance Minister's track actually deals with global financial stability. It deals with resilient financial infrastructure and a whole lot of issues like that. Taxation. So there are a lot of these issues there. And then of course we have the aspect of public diplomacy, where you have different groups like the think tanks from these countries, the parliamentarians from these countries, youth, labor, gender issues, and a whole lot of them. And in fact, under our initiative, we introduced the startup as one of the groups which actually discussing startup as to how, you can ignite or develop or the entrepreneurial spirit amongst the larger population, not just the top sort of capitalists.
The meeting will also kickstart with a panel discussion, as you rightly pointed out, on accelerating the implementation of SDGs. And also India will introduce the broad priorities of all working groups and hear viewpoints of the G20 countries, the guests and international organizations. So what do you expect? What would India like the outcome to be?
Well, I think the SDGs, which actually are supposed to be achieved by 2030, they are a very critical aspect of, let us say, the direction in which India wants the G20 to go. And these are very wide-ranging issues. They are democracy, they are public health, they are nutrition, they are environment, they are reducing social and economic inequality. And so it's a very, very sort of ambitious and a broad agenda where there has been progress, but by concentrating and showcasing and spotlighting as to how India's experience has been, let us say, in achieving the SDG goals, those kind of things. And of course, you take input from other countries because you are sharing experience. Because the Prime Minister has said that it is actually, India is not being India there, it represents Global South. So you bring together the aspirations and the experiences of the developing countries to actually achieve these. And then, of course, there are other issues that they'll be concerned about how the multilateral organization should be working to sort of, in a way, to shield supply of food, fuel and fertilizers from these kind of geopolitical and geoeconomic shocks. So these are very ambitious agendas. You have tourism, you have culture, you have, as I said, inclusive, resilient growth, green transition, how we are going to move from carbon intensive to no carbon or renewable energy based economy. How we are going to the technological transformation, because technology today actually is a double-edged weapon. It is actually very good for society and economic growth, but it also has very dangerous downside. As for example, you have seen recently in the AIMS when the server was hacked. So there are challenges which actually, the fake meat, what I call the deep fakes, for example, and goes on and on. There are so many things actually where one can actually say the danger, the bioweapons, for example. All of these are actually very, very critical issues. So how are we going to make the technological transformation for the development of the world, the global community, whilst actually making sure that its downside or this negative side actually is minimized, or in one way it is controlled in such a way that it does not act as a destabilizing force in the growth of the global community.
As the Prime Minister took the opportunity in Bali and said he would like to promote the program of climate change, saying it could make a big contribution by turning sustainable living into a mass movement. We look forward to what happens in the remaining days of the G20 Sherpa meeting in Udaipur. In the meanwhile, thank you so much, Mr. Yogendra Kumar, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.